Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and answering some questions. I think that sometimes that, as much as I can come up with ideas, some of the greatest ideas come from the questions that come up on various number of platforms come into us. And here's a question for today, which is, can trauma bonding happen in a long distance relationship? Then pause for a minute. You can put it in the chat. Put it in the comments, I guess, what your thoughts are on the answer to that. But can trauma bonding happen in a long-distance relationship? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. Trauma bonding is not contingent on a person being in a room with you. In fact, when you think that you recognize that trauma bonding is also not just limited to intimate relationships. Trauma bonding can have, obviously, the most profound and impactful trauma bonded relationships happen in childhood. And in fact, it's usually often where that apparatus kind of gets sort of set in us. The need to win over a parent or to remain attached to a parent, to be loved, to be attuned to, means that the child has to try harder and harder to be seen, and they hold out for those moments when the parent actually attunes to them, which is not consistent. So a parent who is distracted, unavailable, narcissistic, those are parents with whom a trauma bond would be created, that alternation between good and bad, and that need to sort of try to feel like you have to get them to look towards you. But those good moments keep a person kind of, if you will, in the game. And a child has no choice in this matter. They have to keep trying to remain attached to the parent because, again, for survival needs. So over time, what happens is the child will often internalize blame. I'm not a good kid. I'm not enough. And it'll be multiplied by, for example, a narcissistic parent telling a child, you're selfish or you're greedy or you're ungrateful for wanting something from me, and really voicing that resentment to the child. So the child not only does self-blame to maintain some sense of there's got to be something to do here, and internalizes the harmful words of that parent. And what that does over time, because the child doesn't really have the option of, if you will, divorcing the parent, they've got to stick it out and, again, have to create this narrative structure and then this sense, this kind of attachment and connection that's really based on this idea of like, maybe there's a better day coming, or maybe I can do something to make that better day come. Maybe I can be better. Now, press fast forward, you're in adulthood. If you had a history of trauma-bonded relationships in childhood, certainly the probabilities are higher in adulthood. But even if you didn't have this experience in childhood, there is definitely a likelihood that this could happen in adulthood. If you meet someone narcissistic and you go through the whole love bombing and then the devaluing starts and you feel invested in the relationship, same thing as before. The trauma bonding can happen, that alternation between good and bad. You hold on desperately to those good days, as it were, and you hope that there's going to be more of them. You start wondering if it's your fault. And of course you do, because you're being gaslighted in this relationship and being told that it's your fault. And then you start, again, not only justifying, making excuses, you start taking responsibility for stuff. You find that you keep getting into the same fights over and over, but you think this time there's going to be a different outcome. You try to be all things in the relationship, a personal assistant and a best friend and a sex partner and a house cleaner and everything you can to win this person over. And you also can often have this kind of magical thinking about the relationship. Like, this is a once in a lifetime. Like, the difficulties in these relationships are just a sign from the universe that this is destined. But all of that is this kind of stuff we see in a trauma-bonded relationship. Now, people in trauma-bonded relationships aren't delusional or illusional or out of their minds. They're often able to say, I know this isn't healthy. I know this is not good for me. However, the idea of leaving this thing, it makes me feel like a sense of panic, like I can't catch my breath. And so people almost feel sort of physiologically tied. And this dynamic shows up constantly in narcissistic relationships because, again, the inconsistency, even if it's 90% bad things and 10% good, that 10% good can keep someone in the game. And people might even harken back to those first few months of the relationship. But this question specifically is on this idea of whether trauma bonding could happen in a long distance relationship. And certainly it could. A relationship's a relationship, right? And in fact, I would think that in some ways a long distance relationship could maybe even have a more magnified trauma bonded effect because in the absence of that person being in your face all the time, there can be a lot more inner fantasy work about the relationship. When we come back together, this is going to happen. When I talk to them next, I'm going to be perfect on the call. I'm going to figure out a way to send them a this, or we're going to have a romance. And all of this from a distance. There's almost something that, as it is, a long distance relationship can be destabilizing in its fashion because they're sort of in your mind, but they're not really there. So you can see how the trauma bonded, especially the thoughts, can really kind of run roughshod, as well as the suspicions and the fears. Are they being shady? And maybe they are being shady, but then they tell you you're not. So the abuses in the relationship, the emotional abuses, the gaslighting, the betrayal can all be present. And then you may find yourself justifying that. And the long distanceness of it can, like I said, create it almost like a de-reality to it, that it's not really there. And so it's almost like more of a blank canvas you can paint more onto. But just the same way, in some ways it's a little bit easier to end a long distance relationship because it may not affect your day-to-day because they're far away. But people will say the idea of ending this relationship, even though they're on the other side of the country, same thing. That physiological, I can't imagine doing this. What if things change? What if in 3 months they can move closer? What if they change? And of course, the big ringer is, what if they change for someone new? So if you're in a long distance relationship and say, well, I can't be trauma bonded with them because they're not in my face all the time. Yes, you can. So much of a relationship takes place up in our heads, and in a long distance relationship, even more so. And because the trauma bonding is very much something in a way that's happening internal to us, it's how we carry this relationship in our bodies, in our nervous systems, in our minds, how we're basically, the other person's behaving badly. And we're doing all the heavy lifting of trying to make this fit into our relational structure. This is something that we're really carrying the burden on. So it doesn't matter if that person is sitting 2 feet away or lives 2,000 miles away. So I hope that answers your question. It doesn't matter what the geography. Trauma bonding is always a very, very painful experience and can make it very difficult to make clean and clear decisions about how to proceed in a relationship.